Hello and welcome to the podcast. Unfortunately, co-host extraordinaire John Micton is not with us today. He had a dental emergency, so obviously we all wish him well. He thought he was going to get out in time, but it looks like he won't. But nevertheless, we've got a great panel today. We've done a few discussions with groups of tech directors talking about the countries they live in and the individual environment. And we've done Saudi Arabia, we've done Switzerland, and then I thought what would be really interesting would be to do a Central and Eastern European one. I mean, obviously we could have picked each country individually, but it's a smaller country and I think just doing one together could be really interesting. I live in Prague, so I'm kind of right in the middle of all these places. So for me, I think it's super interesting to learn a bit about what it's like. Maybe you're thinking about working in one of these countries. Maybe you're looking at getting a job either in a school tech department or maybe as a teacher. So I think there could be some really interesting information. And we've got some really knowledgeable people who've spent a few years in these countries. So it'd be great to get a quick introduction. We've got two Brians, so why don't we start with them first? First of all, Brian Farrell, could you just let us know who you are and where you're based?
Sure. So I'm based just outside of Budapest. Our school is about half an hour outside of the city of Budapest, Hungary, in a town called Nagykovácsi. And I live very close to the school. This is just my second year here. Previous to here, I was in Vancouver, Canada, where I'm from. And prior to that, I was in the Middle East and in Asia and a few different schools there. And so happy to be back on the international circuit after returning home for a bit to work in an independent school in Canada.
It's funny how many people go home to their home country and then miss working abroad and want to get the itch to come and do it again. I've seen that a lot of people. I've done that myself, to be honest, as well. So it's
yeah, and it can be that can be a bit of a challenge actually when you're talking about getting into these schools, going home and then coming back. Your networks and your connections change as you're away from the international scene.
Yeah, I've heard people say that. So, do you find that, like, if you do get out, even for a few years, you're not as connected in terms of the international scene? Is that something you noticed?
No, exactly. I mean, I've had the good fortune of meeting my three colleagues on the call here, and it's from going to conferences and events and workshops locally within the region. And so, obviously, if you're not here and working in the region, then you're less connected the longer that you're staying away from that.
Yeah, definitely. Great. So, Brian number two, Brian Wiedemann, do you want to give us a quick introduction?
Yeah. I am currently at the American International School of Vienna. This is my third year at the school. Our school is about 800 students, K-12. We run an American-style curriculum. Vienna is a fantastic city to live in, as I'm sure most are aware from some of the things that get published about the most livable cities in the world. Our school is kind of uniquely positioned out in the 19th district. So we're kind of on the very edge of Vienna, out in the woods, which makes for a really nice kind of atmosphere. We have a pretty good balanced approach to learning at our school, and it fits in well with the work environment here in Austria. It's a really great place to live. Before being here, we lived and worked in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and Abu Dhabi, the UAE, and we spent a bit of time in South Korea too. So like the other Brian with an I, also from Canada originally, but we've been overseas almost 2 decades now, working in international schools.
Interesting. Great stuff. Yeah, I mean, I know all those countries well. I was just in Saudi Arabia last week, actually. Just got back, and as you probably know, that's that is the boom place for international schools. Like, that is where the majority of jobs are going to be coming up. If you hear the numbers, they're building, Neom cities, 9 million people, doesn't even exist right now. Riyadh, they're planning to double the size of Riyadh. That's another 9-10 million. So there's going to be, 700 plus international schools, something like that coming. So it's going to be huge over there, I think.
Yeah, it's a very different environment in Europe than it was in the Middle East or than it was in Asia. So it's important when you're looking at what you want to do for a school, you also think about the kind of work environment, because I would say it's consistent in the different areas of the world for different aspects. So when you're thinking about what you're looking for, your age, what you'd like to save, and the kind of work-life balance you're looking for really can help pinpoint an area of the world.
Fantastic. Great stuff. Next up in Warsaw, Jeff Derry. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, everyone. I suppose I'm the odd one out. I'm the most northern of the tech directors here, but I come from down under. So I'm from Australia. So I'm also the odd one out. I think I'm the only non-Canadian of these 4 tech directors. Yeah, this is my 4th year here at the American School of Warsaw. We're just on the outskirts of Warsaw, probably about half an hour from the center of Warsaw. I'm the I'm the director of technology here. Before this, I was in Malaysia as a tech director, and before that, I was in China. But in between Malaysia and Warsaw, we actually had a gap year. So we went home as a family for a year, took a year off, bought a caravan, traveled around Australia, and then got back into the international scene. And Warsaw it's one of those hidden gems. I think when I first got my job here, so many people said to me, "Why are you going to Warsaw? What's all that about?" But then people who've come to visit us and see us, they just think it's an incredible country. It's one of the fastest growing economies in Europe. It's a massive country. It's really big. It's got everything from seaside to mountains to deserts. Yeah, and Warsaw is just a really modern, rebuilt European city, and we love living here. I've got 2 kids, and we're close to the school. We can walk to school. We've got forests nearby. It's just a really good. I know Brian was talking about lifestyle, and for me, it's just it ticks that lifestyle box really well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I have a Polish wife, and so I spend a lot of time in Poland. So yeah, definitely we'll get into that a little bit. And last but not least, living in the same place as me in Prague, Sheldon.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how many Canadians we've got on this call. I'm not sure why we all left, but so I'm the Director of Educational Technology at the International School of Prague. We are a 4-program IB school, just under 1,000 kids. The story I tell is that we came to Prague for about 4 years, and that was 10 years ago. So I think that says something about the livability of the city. And like everyone else in this call, I think this is part of the Central and Eastern Europe thing, is that work-life balance is a thing, and the cities are big enough to have everything you need, but also small enough to be accessible, and you're always close to a forest or getting out of the city, and so it really does have a great work-life balance. I've got 2 kids in the school, and that's definitely kept us here longer. So that's I guess other places I've been. I left Canada in '98, so we've been through Japan, Kuwait, long time in China, Indonesia, and now here. And so still have, I think, a couple more posts in me at some point, but Prague's a tough place to leave. So I'm not sure when that's going to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's probably a good place to start about the work-life balance. And then we can get into we can go around the individual countries and talk a bit about it. I mean, I've heard a few people say this, that, there's people stay longer in jobs in Europe. It is a work-life balance. I mean, I think that, the reality is that the packages people can get in the Middle East, definitely in Saudi, but even in Asia as well, can be better sometimes. But people tend to come to Europe. I mean, obviously, there's great schools in Europe, but the work-life balance is definitely a big factor, I think. Is there anyone else got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I might actually jump in on that one again. Actually, I know I kicked that one off.
No.
This is my first post through Europe, and the work-life balance thing is, I mean, you still work incredibly hard. I mean, schools are busy places. There's no getting around that. Yeah. But there is a different pace. I mean, at the end of the day, working in Asia, quite often there was domestic help. Same with the Middle East. And so there was someone to help out with your kids, or to make dinner, or to whatever you needed. That doesn't really exist here. This is far more of sort of a normal Western life. And so at the end of the day, your kids are done school at 4:30. You've got to take them home and deal with them. And that's wonderful. It also means that the schools work at a slightly different pace, and you look at some of the things that perhaps your counterparts in some of these other, usually bigger schools as well, are doing, and it's a little hard sometimes to keep up with their pace of change.
Yeah,
you have to be a little more focused on what you do.
I would say, in addition to what Sheldon's saying, kind of as a Westerner, living in the Middle East, even in Asia, a school is often not just a work environment, it's also a lifestyle. Saudi especially, you live on a compound, so you spend not only the workday with everybody, but then you go to the pool together after school, and you get together for dinner. And so my wife and I were a little concerned when we came to Europe about, what does that look like? How are we going to make friends? Because usually your friends are the people in the school. So not only is it your work environment, but you also kind of get a little bit of separation at the end of the day, which works for some people and doesn't work for others. So it's not kind of that all encompassing, all in one kind of deal, I think.
Yeah, really good point. Funny, just a side point about the nannies and things. It's interesting because it is coming to the Czech Republic. I have two friends now that have Filipino nannies, and there's agencies recruiting people to come here now and stuff. So it's interesting. It's not obviously nothing like in Middle East where everyone has that kind of thing, but interesting. So anyone else on the sort of Sheldon Hype?
Just to echo what Brian was saying, it's interesting that it does change the school culture. There's a lot more things that are available in the community outside of the school. And so, as he was saying, for some people that's great, but if you're used to the school is your everything, it's a little bit of a shift from some of these other schools. So it's the culture piece is something.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just going to echo what both Sheldon and Brian have said. I think with it also comes some freedom. Like, I mean, in Malaysia, it was very much a bit like the Middle East. Obviously, we were compound living. So, so your neighbors would be your co-workers. Here in Warsaw, I live in a house not far from the school. My kids can walk to school or ride to school. Obviously, there's other parts of the world you couldn't do that. It seems to be a lot safer, and it is really much a lot more like living at home. Where if I was back in Australia, my kids would be doing activities outside of school, and they'd be going to clubs and doing things. It echoes it here a lot. That's exactly what life in Warsaw is like. The other thing is that you also blend in so well. I mean, as a white old man, I stood out in China. I stood out.
I've got feelings, Jeff. Don't insult me like that.
But you stand out in these countries, and people know straight away that you're an expat. Here, living in Eastern Europe, you just sort of blend in, and people don't know. So it's sort of there's a bit of freedom with that as a person living overseas and working overseas.
That one's a double-edged sword for me, Jeff. I agree with you. You can blend in as long as you keep your mouth shut. But Hungarian, I can say, living here has not been the easiest language to access, and so sometimes people are a bit put off when they'll speak to me in Hungarian, and then just get a blank stare in response. So, but to your point, you can blend in a little more. I feel like it allows you to be a little more close to the culture you're living in. I'm in the much same situation as you. I'm in a house that's a 15-minute walk from the school, and my neighbors on both sides are Hungarian locals. And on one side, they don't speak a word of English, and that's been really fun for us It's a beautiful couple that tries to talk to us when they're gardening, and we figure stuff out. They can't understand us, we can't understand them, but somehow we've managed to communicate, which has been really fun.
I think that's a really interesting point about language, because I mean, with the exception of Brian in Vienna, which is relatively a pretty easy language, and I did it at school. Like, I mean, Hungarian, Czech, and Polish are very hard. Polish and Czech are Slavic languages. So I lived in the Netherlands for 3 years, and I spoke Dutch pretty well after 3 years. Like, I've been here 19 years, and it's probably about the same as 3 years in the Netherlands. And now I'm gonna take my citizenship test to get a Czech passport, actually. But that was a lot of work, like huge. I could have done a couple of doctorates, like the amount of work I spent learning Czech. So I think that is something people need to bear in mind, that it's it's completely doable, and obviously it depends on your aptitude for language and how much time you have. But I think international schools generally are pretty bad places to learn language. I've heard that from a lot of people. You're in a bit of an English speaking bubble. Your friends, even if they're local friends, tend to speak English. So I know that's an issue.
I think that's a good plug for.
Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, Brian.
I think that's a good plug for actually working in a technology department. So you kind of called me out there, Dan, saying I'm in a country where the language is easy to learn. I get quite a few laughs in my office when I'm testing out my German. But what you are exposed to is everyone in my office is local as in European. So I get a lot of great exposure here to some of the local culture and different languages and things like that. That as a teacher, before I was a tech director and I was in the classroom, most of the other teachers were Western. So it's one of the kind of hidden benefits, I think, of being a tech director, is that interaction that you have, especially working with vendors too.
That's a great point. Yeah.
I think the one thing that I found with all of that, sorry, Brian, I think I just cut you off, is that Prague being a capital, and I'm sure the other cities are the same. I'll go in and try with my best Czech, and people will answer back in English, and like, oh, clearly you want the English menu. Whereas when you're in Indonesia or you're in China, it's a lot easier to get yourself lost, and it forces the language issue a little bit. And so I found it was easier to engage with the language sort of authentically on the day-to-day in those places. Whereas now, in fairness, my kid was playing baseball on a local team, and so we were in every little rinky-dink small town around Prague. There wasn't a lot of English there, and so that does force it a little bit. So again, it depends how much you want to get out of that school bubble.
Yeah, it's interesting. We moved to a village just north of Prague, not a million miles away from ISP actually, and definitely around here. You go to the local pub, and it's you go 20 kilometers outside Prague, 10 kilometers. It starts to be a different world, altogether. I think it's the same with all these cities.
I think that's the other side of that is the benefit of being more Central or Eastern European. I feel like the schools provide a lot more support than perhaps they might do in Western Europe because they know those barriers are there in terms of having staff that will help in buying a car or registering your documents or dealing with your visa issues. In my case, anyway, I can say that's been outstanding here in terms of the support and help in accessing those things. And I don't think that's quite at the same level in Western Europe.
Yeah, now that's an interesting point, because I think, how have you all seen things changing? I mean, I don't know when you all first came to the region. I first came to Prague in 99. I've lived here twice. Then I went to the Netherlands and came back. But I mean, back then, all these countries were, with the exception of Austria, were kind of regarded as kind of a hardship posting. It was very different. People got, much more assistance in terms of housing and all these other things. But I think I've seen it become much more like it's still a little bit different from, say, Western Europe, from, say, Germany, Netherlands, France. But I think it's becoming very much on the same level, and the way, the help you get is becoming similar to those countries. Has anybody else seen that? Or feel free to disagree with me.
I would really challenge that notion that, say, Warsaw is a hardship post. I mean, it still might be seen and people don't know about it. But I mean, it is. I mean, we do get the same support that Brian does. Like, when I bought my car, the school basically did all my paperwork for me. Like, when my insurance is due, the ladies in the HR office will ring me up and say, look, can you come down and pay your insurance? And the people come here. So you get lots of support. But it is really an easy, as Sheldon was alluding to before, you're in a capital city. It's a really easy place to live. There's really good transport. There's really good people speak English. And if they don't, they'll be so apologetic and they'll find someone who does. And you're in the middle of Europe, really. I mean, it's so easy to get to other countries. I can hop on a plane and be in, Sheldon or Brian's city within an hour, or I can drive there in, 4 or 5 hours. It's just, and it's cheap is the other thing. It's sort of, So that whole idea of a hardship posting, is I think I've been here 4 years and it's just been really easy.
I think it was a perception, though, that was much stronger early. And even then, I don't think it was really true. I mean, when I came here in 99, I was with Deloitte. I was an IT consultant. I wasn't working for a school. And, it was, you kind of got the same assistance as if you were going to work in, Central Asia or Russia or something. And it was just so easy to live here. I never had, even back then, when there was no shopping centers, there was no shopping malls, it was very different. But even then, it was super easy, I thought.
Yeah, I think, living in Vienna, again, great place to be. But I think any smart school these days knows that they got to provide those services if they want their people on campus during the day, right? Like if you're a school and not helping with visas and not helping with cars or housing or anything like that, that's time you're losing those valuable people. And I'm not sure about the other cities, but Vienna is a Monday to Friday, 9:30 to 4, maybe. If there's a holiday on Thursday, Fridays, nobody's probably around, and everything's closed on Sunday. So, getting all that stuff done, the school's got to help out if they want you to be around. I think it's a good indication of a good school too.
Sure.
Well, and I think what you're talking about there, I mean, that whole idea of work-life balance isn't just in schools; it's in the local culture as well. And so, for some of the spots in Asia, there was always an amount of money to get something done if you needed it done, regardless of the time. That's not true here. there are some things like, getting your dishwasher fixed or something like that. It doesn't really matter how much you're willing to pay. It might not happen on a Saturday. And
Yeah.
so that help from the school is super important. But it's interesting, that whole of where Western Europe ends and where that Central Eastern Europe starts is a line that's been moving to the east. And so when we first came, you see that in prices, you see that in housing, you see that in the amount of English, you see the number of services that are here. And we are now on the other side of that line. Like, I would say that the lifestyle in Prague is very much Western Europe. And you see that in what you pay for things. So
I'd say, and that's something for people thinking of moving to one of these places. It's a really important point. Like, it's not as cheap as you think. I mean, if you take Prague, for example, which is, I know all your countries a little bit, but Prague by far the best. I mean, it's cheaper than London. Let's say food, going out, housing, things, but it's the same price as like a second tier kind of English city now. Maybe a second or third tier. It's regional city in England. It's not that different here in prices now.
Except maybe the beer, it's still cheaper.
I was going to say the price of beer in the Czech Republic is very good, even compared to Poland.
So back in 99, it was 8 crowns, which back then was 50 crowns to the dollar, so 20 cents in 99. It was insane. Like, you just couldn't spend your money on a night out. It was amazing. Cool. Just quick point I'd love to talk about the types of schools. Obviously, one trend has been just a global trend, a number of growth in international schools, and I've seen it in Prague. The numbers are astonishing. Obviously, you've got the kind of more traditional types of international schools that you all work for. Anyone want to comment about what's the school environment like here? What are the types of schools, and what are the kind of the differences in the working environment? Obviously, you probably only know your own school, but just from what you've been hearing about other places.
Well, we're the American School of Warsaw, and we're connected directly with the embassy. So we still have that embassy connection. We run an American curriculum, but we're also a 3-program IB school. So, I mean, I've only ever taught internationally in the last 15 years in 3-program IB schools. So this one's a little bit different. So it's an American school with an IB program. There are other international schools, but when I compare it to, say, when I was in Kuala Lumpur, like in Malaysia, there was so many international schools. Like, there was, maybe, I think at one stage there was about 30 schools in that city. And those schools could also, we had lots of connections. All our sport was just in the city, and we'd go to different schools. We'd have tech meetups with different schools. Here, there's a few other international schools, like there's a British school, there's another American Warsaw school or something, and there's a French school, but they all seem to be a bit more niche and a bit smaller. I'm finding that, if you really want to go to a top tier international school, we're almost the only school, we're the only game available. We're the only player. So I don't know what it's like for other people. If you're all sponsored by.
No, I think that's a big difference, Jeff, is I think the 4 of us are at very similar schools, and probably we would learn more from talking to each other than from the British school down the road, or the Christian school, or the French school, or whatever else we might have in town. And so that's perhaps a different feel, being in probably a smaller European center compared to some of the larger Asian centers, or even a larger European city. We don't have a lot of peers that are right, down the road as we might do in another region.
Yeah, I mean, so we just ran my colleague James a meetup in Thailand. I mean, in Thailand, there's over 200 international schools now, and I think Bangkok's over 150. And there's probably 20 of those that are, you would, obviously there's no official school categorization, but tier 1 type schools. So it's just the numbers in Asia are just completely different.
I think further to that point, when I was in the UAE, the international schools, there was a new one popping up every day.
Oh yeah.
And for-profit, not-for-profit, American curriculum, this curriculum, that curriculum. And one thing I definitely don't miss from being in the UAE, as great a place as it was the education ministries were getting pretty heavy-handed in their involvement of school visits and publishing things in newspapers and being tied into tuition raises. Saudi was not quite where the UAE was, but it was involved in regular visits and who could go to our school. So it's nice to not have that sort of, I don't want to call it interference, but that sort of running running alongside what you're trying to do as a school. We're DP school and American curriculum as well, but in Saudi and in the UAE, we also had full-time employees at the school that just did government relations to kind of manage those governing agencies.
Yeah. Interesting, Brian, about UAE. I mean, you probably all know about Ofsted. It's the regulator in the UK. I mean, just the name Ofsted will strike fear into the heart of anyone working to a school. I mean, it's like horrific. I mean, I've been at a school in England when an Ofsted inspection was coming, and like saw two teachers crying. It was like, but all the ex-Ofsted inspectors went to work in the UAE ministry. So that whole ministry and that whole culture is based on Ofsted. So that's why it's kind of like that.
Yeah, I think I would agree with everything that's been said so far. And so here in Prague, there's a couple of, I would call, true international schools with sort of a higher percentage of international teachers, maybe an internationally focused curriculum. But you've got the British curriculum, you've got this nationality, that nationality, whatever it happens to be. In town, we're the only full continuum IB school. But I think, like everywhere else in the world, our industries are changing, and we're starting to see more and more startups and more schools come in, and some of them have got some game, and they're going down that road. And I think one of the dangers for these long-standing, like this is our 75th anniversary, these long-standing international schools, is the complacency that comes with that, and keeping an eye on your own backyard. Because I do think that, and you see this throughout a lot of Asian schools as well, like you're talking about 200 schools in Thailand. You go back 15, 20 years ago, there wasn't near that number there. And so, especially because we're all in smaller markets, that increased competition can come up fast and make a big difference real fast.
It's interesting. Yeah. Just speaking from the other side of it, as a parent, when my son started school recently, and I was looking at all the schools in Prague, and there was only kind of 3 that were really, I would really want him to go to. ISP, obviously, Riverside, where he went. There's a couple of others, but the rest are all for profit, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's some great for profit schools. It's very much about the leadership and the culture. But I mean, the schools just didn't exist 2 years ago, like the American Academy and the Canadian School and all these. They just appear from nowhere. And I guess, and if you're an expat moving to a city, like you don't know, the difference between the International School of Prague and the American Academy. The fact that one's been here 75 years and one was open last year. I think it's a challenging market in terms of recruiting students and things now.
And when you're looking at double-digit inflation, when you're looking at double-digit inflation and what's happening to all of our tuitions, some of these, what we might call a second-tier school, become really attractive to a lot of families.
Yeah, definitely. Jeff?
Sorry, Jeff.
Yeah, no, that's fine. One thing that I noticed when I first got here, and I really appreciate, is the actual local staff that we hire. Like when I was in China or when I was in Malaysia, we hired Chinese teachers to teach Chinese. Here we've got a lot of staff that will be they're Polish nationals, but they'll be teaching math, or they'll be a homeroom teacher. So it just I think it adds a lot more culture to the school, and you become a bit more authentic and becoming part of your community, as you're not just a whole bunch of expats plopped into an international school. I've got so many colleagues who are, true colleagues. They're not teaching assistants that, are locals, and it adds a real richness to the school. And I really appreciate, my son, when he was in grade 2, having a Polish teacher just as his teacher. So,
yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
A lot of them often have multiple nationalities, and then they've come. We've got Canadian Hungarians and Australian Hungarians that have lived here for a time and moved back to their other home, and then come back. And yeah, that's really a very valuable experience to have on staff.
Sorry, Brian, jump in.
No, I was just going to say, Brian jogged my memory there a little bit. I think you mentioned, we might talk about it, Dan, that the longevity at the schools here is definitely based on that as well. People tend to stay at European schools a little bit longer, and so are maybe a little more invested in some ways in the business of the school and the direction of the school. And to Sheldon's point, I think it's more important than ever that schools clearly find their niche and whatever it is that they are really pressing or attempting to promote as who they are as a school, with so many options available.
Yeah, Sheldon.
You hit on something really interesting there, Brian, with the longevity piece. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I mean, it's great that you've got that depth going through, but investigating the reasons why you've got the longevity is also super important as well. You know, if you're working at an international school in Bogor, Indonesia, people generally speaking don't move there to move to Bogor, Indonesia. You're going there for the school. People move to Prague just to go to Prague. And so you do run the risk, if you're not careful, of having people stay a long time at a school and they're not invested in the school, they're invested in their life in the city. And so how do you maintain that vigor and that excitement in your teaching community when they might not just move on naturally, which I think you do see in a lot of other places. So it's an interesting challenge for a school leader.
And it really adds like when you're trying to implement change into a school, if you've got those teachers that have been embedded here for 25 years and they were in the last campus, you know, that we were at 25 years ago, just to, you know, we're going through a big high period of change here at our school at the moment. And it's for some staff, for everyone it's challenging, but it's really particularly challenging here and compared to similar changes that I went through in other schools. Yeah, so that whole transitions and change can be an innovation can be, you know, hard to sort of, I think, yeah, Sheldon used the word passion, or that, you know, that vigor for school is, you know, so important.
And also when you've got staff who've been there forever and you get like a new director or head of a certain department, they come in, they want to make changes. It's like dropping a bomb in the school, you know, whereas if you're in a school in Asia where, you know, the staff all transition out after 5 years, it's kind of smooth, you know, but I've seen it happen in a lot of, you know, traditional schools in Europe with people that stay forever. When people try to change things, people are more sort of entrenched in their ways a little bit, I think.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're stuck in their ways or trying to go back to stuff. We've got some people here who have been here well over 2 decades that are still completely, you know, they're pushing for the change. And so I think it's a little bit more about mindset, but it is something I think you do need to watch as well. I think this is the only school I've ever been at where people have done their entire career in this one school.
Wow, yeah. It's interesting. We mentioned about staff and recruiting. Like, obviously, in terms of tech department staff, like, what's the kind of recruiting environment like? And you know, are you always recruiting local people from the host country, or are you sometimes getting people in your tech team that want to come here from, you know, the UK, Western European countries, other continents? Anyone want to jump in on the, you know, the sort of tech team recruitment and what it's like then, and do people stay, you know, is there longevity in teams?
Yeah. My job so we have 6 members in our team, 6 tech team members. They're all local hires. So mine is the only one in my office that's an overseas contract. And then we do have 1.5 tech coaches, but we tend to hire on local contracts, which means somewhere within Europe. But we've got a lot of diversity within our department. So finding, and I know I've talked, I think, with all these gentlemen at some of our tech directors meetings about finding skilled tech people to work in a school. Teachers, okay, great. I don't want to say no problem. I'm not the principals. They might disagree with me, but finding skilled people is really difficult in tech, in a school environment for the tech office. And so we tend to hire based on trainability rather than existing skills. So if they have the right mindset, the right attitude, we'll figure out how to train them in whatever the role is, rather than trying to find someone who's got the skills that we're looking for. I think it's a real problem. I'll use the word problem, not opportunity, because it's so tough to find those skilled people to work in a tech office.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of competition out there, you know, from other industries and other, you know, we're competing with the companies. And like, I've got, you know, staff that could probably get an extra 50% on top of their salary if they worked somewhere else in Poland. And especially with the, you know, with the war in Ukraine, you know, a lot of, that was such a tech hub, you know, that a lot of that work is moving elsewhere, and it's, you know, coming to this part of the world. So it's hard you've got to offer, I think, the staff something else. I agree with Brian. Yeah, we look for trainability. You know, people that, you know, might not have the skills yet, but we know that they can get them. But you've also got to offer extra. I think some, you know, like that. And community is a big part of that. You know, if you're part of our team and our community, and, you know, there might be a few extras, like you got the school gym you can use, you got the school swimming pool. Yeah. But it's tough.
Yeah. And I would echo that as well. so Google's moved into town. We've got a whole bunch of big pharma in town. And so if someone starts at our help desk here, there's nowhere for them to go. And so they can make the same money as we're offering and have a whole career path in front of them going to one of these other places. And so we find it really hard to compete with that. And so to Jeff's point, it's back to that work-life balance thing. So we're hiring people also maybe a little bit later on in their careers who are realizing, this working in a school thing where if my kid has something going on at their school, I can actually leave it at 2:00 and go see my kid's thing, which they might not be able to do if they're working for a Google or a Microsoft or whatever. So it's finding what value add you give, because it's probably not going to be in career path or in package.
Yeah,
definitely.
having some flexibility around. We've been working from home more often when it's possible, as long as there's projects that can be done, that really helps. I think all of our schools are somewhat unique also in that, unlike perhaps some places in Asia, we're all slightly outside of the city. For some people, that's great. For others, that means it's a bigger commute because it's that much farther away. But we've faced many of the same challenges. One thing I've really appreciated here is our school has a local scholarship program as well for our locally hired staff. For their children. And so each year that's open to local staff to apply for. And it really then obviously incentivizes those local staff to want to keep working and improving our school, because they'll have the opportunity to have their children also coming to the school. So that's a huge perk. Now, obviously, we can't do that for everyone, but for those that are able to get that scholarship for their children, that's hugely impactful too.
Yeah, it's interesting on the recruitment. My first one, my one and only job in education was in Prague. I worked for the Anglo-American College. It's a sort of from 16 to 18, but mostly higher education. And I worked there, and it was just I love the pace of life. I love the academic year, the way it goes. But I think you've got to hire people, sell them on that as being a benefit, haven't you, as well? And also sell people on the fact that, look, if you want to work for an international school, you could potentially go to another country and go up to be a tech director. If you're willing to move, it's finding people that might actually want to move between countries and get that, because given the sort of very strange system that exists in international schools between local hires and foreign hires, there's often not the opportunity, like Sheldon mentioned, in their own school to get the kind of foreign hire package, but there is an opportunity for them to get the skills and go to another school.
Because a lot of our skills are really niche skills too. And I think about my systems people, like the fact that I've got someone who can take Power School and modify it and, build something out of it, or I've got a person that just knows, how our school works so well and knows how the subjects work and how this works with this. I mean, they're not skills that these people can sort of, maybe take into another place. So to find someone to replace them with that skill set, like to find a Power School person can be really hard, or to find someone who knows our school or knows the school systems. They're not widely used outside of international schools, so that's an extra challenge for us as well.
Yeah, and so one of the other things that we've started exploring a little bit more is the younger than post-secondary folks. So some of the gymnasium kids who are 16, 17, 18 coming out with network certifications, and they're looking to earn some money before they go off to college. And so can we get them in young, have them work part-time for us while they go to school, or whatever it happens to be, but it's tapping maybe non-traditional sources of staffing.
Yeah.
Very good point.
Yeah, I think when we were recently hiring a new Veracross person for our school, Power School Veracross, we ended up hiring someone internally, but a lot of the candidates were looking for flexibility in hours and flexibility in working remotely, which I think is another one of those challenges for a school. So much of what we do is in person and helping kids and being around. And there's a little bit more flexibility in our office for sure, but not what you're seeing in industry across the world. So yeah, you got to find those other kind of perks that you can give to help out, because maybe some of the ones that are available in the tech industry aren't quite the same in schools. I think it also really helps selling it as a school and a place where what we're doing is good and beneficial and altruistic for the community in general. That does speak to people. And I think, Sheldon, when you were mentioning people later in their careers, sometimes if you're maybe a little burnout working for a Google or a Microsoft or whoever, having a different purpose can really make a difference as well.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. Great, guys. I mean, obviously we're coming up against the time sooner. So maybe a couple of quick things. It'd be interesting to talk about, what laws and regulations really affect you. Obviously, GDPR. You're all in the European Union. That's a huge thing. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's interpreted very different in different countries. So it'd be great to see how, like Germany would be the most extreme in terms of, or maybe Brian, you'll tell me Austria is the same, but people are paranoid about it and everything goes via the Workers' Council, and then other countries have got much more relaxed, and also other countries have like local tech regulations and laws and privacy laws. So anybody want to jump in on the perspective from their school and their country?
I'm happy to get it started. Coming from Saudi, it was a huge shift for me, and I remember working there and hearing about it, being like, "Ooh, not that I totally agree with it. It's smart. It's something that needs to happen, and it is ultimately beneficial. But it's an everyday thing in school. GDPR. It's an everyday conversation with teachers not understanding and helping them understand, and students and parents about why we can or why we can't, or why it takes that much longer to get a software. I find Austria is pretty restrictive. Brian and I were recently having emails back and forth about our GDPR notices and what are you doing and what does that look like? Because it's all kind of gray, some of it, and so you need to interpret what does that mean for a school in your specific context, which I think is a benefit. But yeah, it's I don't want to say it's a full-time job, but you certainly could make it a full-time job in just GDPR, and maybe that's not a bad thing. But
Brian,
it does.
in Austria, is it similar to Germany, where I was just talking to school recently, where you have the Workers' Council, which has got a lot of power, made up from the employees, and they have, if you want to implement a new system, they have to approve it. The Workers' Council has to say, okay, we're satisfied, this is, correct on privacy, it's not taking away someone's job. Is Austria like that, or is it a bit more relaxed?
I think Austria is. Our school is kind of unique that we have a special built into the treaty through the US and Austria. So things are a little different at our school than they are at other local schools. But we were in our SLT meeting this week talking about video surveillance systems inside of schools, which up until recently was not possible in Austria and is still very restrictive. So yeah, it's an important topic, but it requires a lot of time and energy for sure, which usually falls in the technology department, despite what is recommended within GDPR regulation. But I'll leave it at that. That's me just getting a little.
Brian, you had a point over Brian?
Yeah. I think to Brian's point, it's the biggest piece of that, and it was obviously all brand new for me moving to Europe too, is just slowing everything down. And sometimes that's a benefit because it does make us pause and think about whatever the shiny new thing is that we want to implement. And maybe we think of that a little more critically, but it can be frustrating at times, and especially again working with teachers if they're new to the region, trying to explain to them why it's not just important but required that they slow down and be considering of things before they jump into them. So that's a huge challenge, I think, practically in terms of implementing GDPR. It's just the pace of what it involves.
And so I think I'm lucky in a way that the Czech Republic seems to have taken a very sort of common sense approach to GDPR. It's not quite as overt in your face. I'm not really sure what the word is that you see in some of the other Western European countries. It's still there. But I think the biggest thing when we've got faculty coming in is, so for how many years in tech have we been saying it's all about integration, find the thing, do what's best for kids, and now all of a sudden here it's like, well, stop, you can't do that anymore. So we're actually kind of going against the last decade and a half of cultural indoctrination of faculty. And it's hard because some of them are coming in and they're coming in from some of these big Asian schools and they're used to just, I've got this great tool, I'm going off to do it. It's got a Google login, that's it, we're off. And by the time you find out about it, the horse is kind of already out of the barn. So I think for me, that's the biggest challenge is, because I don't want to be the gatekeeper standing in front of these things, even if I could.
Yeah. Great. Anyone else got anything to jump in on regulations and GDPR and things?
Well, I think to further on what Sheldon said, we're about education and teaching and learning. So what I'd rather do is spend the time teaching teachers and students and parents what GDPR is and why they should care. But the reality is that we have so little time to get in front of our teachers and do PD with them. I don't want to spend it on passwords and GDPR. I'd rather spend it on best practice in classroom. So it's an interesting spot where it's important and we'd like to do the teaching and learning, but finding the right time with all the other initiatives that we're doing in the school can be difficult.
Definitely. And it also sort of hinders a bit of play. I mean, a bit like Sheldon was saying, like we encourage kids to try new things and teachers to try new things. But when you've got to go through these hoops, or like they're not hoops, that's not the right word, but like we've got systems in place. So, we can't, let's talk about extensions or apps, apps on Google Docs. We shut them down except for the ones that we allow. So a teacher comes to me and says, look, I'd love to try this with my kids. We've got to go through that whole process and slow it down rightly because we want to make sure things are correct. But it just sort of takes away a bit of that play. And we've got to put these systems in place that, like, when I was in Asia, I didn't worry about necessarily what people added to their Google Docs or their Google Forms. Here, you've got to think about, I had, really good apps that I used that were made in Russia. I'm not going to be able to use them here at all now. So it's how do we keep that play and that sense of, trial and error and experimenting.
Yeah, and it's bandwidth as well, because as you have to go and now evaluate all of that stuff, and those evaluations take a while. And so, what's your staffing like? How does that go? Can some of the people on your team do it? Do they have that capacity to think about it in this way? Are they trained the right way? So it is a huge lift with all of this stuff.
Yeah, we're lucky we've got a DPO. It's not a full-time position, but I'm sure you've all got similar. But we've got a data protection officer, and that's part of his role. Is that he's the one who will talk to the lawyers and give the final say on yes, we can do this, even when it comes to contracts. And there's like those hoops to go through there. Like we just tried to implement a payment system for a shop we've got at school, an online payment system. It took us about 6 months just to get through the legal contract. And it wasn't me, luckily. It was our DPO working with the lawyers and the companies. So, I mean, there are, for right or wrong, there's these hoops and things that, not hoops, but, regulations we need to meet.
Right. And I think like most things, it's a cultural piece as well. I mean, we've tried to really frame this as this is about child protection in 2024, whatever year we're in now. And so we're slowly starting to get more and more teachers coming in and asking the question of, can I do this, rather than just jumping into it? And those conversations are a lot faster. And I like to think that there's a lot of things that the teachers filter out before they even get to me, which is kind of where you want it to be. Otherwise, being the gatekeeper never really works.
No,
definitely. Yeah, fantastic perspective. I mean, I personally think GDPR is overkill. I understand why, like Brian said, I know why it exists. I think it comes from a good place. I think the practicalities of implementing it, if you take my perspective as someone who runs a small business, it's just a nightmare, and definitely I don't think that the hoops I have to jump through benefit me. I think it stops me from being able to generate revenue and employ people and do things that the EU should want me to do. But I think it comes from a good place, and like, it was really good to hear your perspectives. I think every country is very different. And like I said, if we had a German person on here, I think that they'd be saying what an easy life you all have compared to them. Fantastic discussion. I think a quick thing to finish. Interesting. I was just looking at Internations. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of it. It's an expat meetup group. They're all around the world. I actually met my wife at Internations, and they're very interesting. And they do a ranking of they sort of poll their members every year and do a ranking of the best and worst places to live for expats. So it'd be interesting to go through the 4 countries. So let's go from worst to best. Who thinks their country is gonna be worst, out of interest? Let's see who thinks they're gonna be worst. None of you?
I'll speak up.
The worst by a long way. Yeah, no, you're wrong.
Am I right?
No, wrong. Yeah, wrong. The worst is Austria. Outside there was 53 countries polled. Austria is 45 out of 53. Very low. Wow. I'm curious why that is. I've heard people say Vienna isn't always a friendly city, but then I've heard different perspectives on that. I'm going to Austria tomorrow. I love it personally, but I think it's interesting. It's interesting. It was the bottom one.
Well, I think it's different because it's based on a country, right? That's why I'm speaking up, because Budapest is fantastic.
Yeah. Exactly.
The rest of Hungary maybe is a different story. Same in Austria.
Fun thing to do is it's got no perspective. Next is Poland. Poland and Hungary are right next to each other, actually, 30, 34, 35. So very, very similar. And the winner, of course, that's why I live here, the Czech Republic, coming in at 20. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I know all your countries very well, and all my friends that live there and all the people I know like living there. So it's really great to hear all your perspectives about life there and to get into a bit of a tech. Obviously, there's only so much we can get into in a 1 hour discussion, but thanks very much, everyone. If you've got any links you want to share, please let me know. We can put them in the show notes. If any of you've got any questions for any of the hosts, I'm sure they're all very open people. If you're thinking of moving to them, just get in touch with me or we'll put the emails in. I'm sure they'd all be happy to give you some advice. So anything to add, guys? And any parting words?
I think just the one thing for me is that we're all in smallish countries compared to living in, say, China or whatever it is. And so I don't find I've got a big in-country network anymore, but the regional network is strong. I mean, these are the guys that I call if I've got a question about something. So the networks are still there, even though the geography is kind of fractured a little bit. The professional community is still strong.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'd just like to not echo that, but just talking about living in a European country and just I'm really enjoying seasons. Like coming from China where there's a bit of seasons, in Malaysia where we didn't, but all of a sudden, we've got 4 seasons every year. And like on Monday here it snowed. We had softball training started and we had about 2 centimeters of snow, so that was interesting. But just like getting at, there's so much modern history and ancient history that you don't get living in other parts of the world. Like my wife was downtown Warsaw yesterday and she showed me a photo of the fence of the old ghetto in Warsaw. There was a marker on the ground, and there's that stuff, you just walk past it every day, and it's just such a rich, living in Eastern Europe is such a rich experience, and I just recommend it for everyone.
Great stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's such a unique place for that access to. You want to hike in nature and be in the woods, you can do that out your door. You want to be downtown in a cosmopolitan city, you can do that on great transit. The travel opportunities, 3 of us are going to be in Paris for Learning 2 tomorrow. I mean, that just speaks to how easy it is to access that, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I'd echo everything that we've said. It's when it's the right time in your career, Europe is a great place, really great place all across it.
Fantastic. So thanks again, everybody. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you all soon. Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.